Okay, so welcome to my talk. Sorry for the little delay we had, but we had some technical difficulties, but I guess it happens at the beginning always. So the title of this talk is React Remixed. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Daniel Afonso. I work currently as a developer advocate for OX Group. I'm an again IO instructor and I'm an Altiero ambassador. Besides this, you can find me on any social network at the handle Daniel JC Afonso. So what is this talk about? You might see here web fetch API, HTML forms, data objects, URLs, headers. So pretty much this talk is about relearning the web. Why? Because that's what Remix gives you. Now you might be wondering, yeah, we pretty much are having JS fatigue. There's always a new framework or something showing up in the JavaScript ecosystem. The thing which is great with Remix is when you learn Remix, you accidentally learn the web because the way it was built, it ends up setting up everything that you might need to deal with the web nowadays. So where did it come from? Well, Remix was created by the React training team, mainly by Michael Jackson and Ryan Florence. This started as a closed project, so it was an enterprise project that could be bought a license for, but then they turned it open source after an investment and it made it public to everyone. After a while, someone joined the team, Kenzie Dodds, for those of you who know him, and it potentiated the growing of Remix in the ecosystem. So, what's Remix? It's obviously not that song stuff, but it's actually a full stack web framework. This full stack web framework lets you focus on user interfaces and work back through web standards so that you can deliver a fast, sleek, and resilient user experience. Besides this, Remix is four things. First thing is a compiler. So by using AS-build, Remix will generate stuff like an HTTP handler, the browser build that will automatically include stuff like code splitting by the routes, fingerprinted asset imports, and pretty much anything that's needed to run the application in the browser side. A third thing that this compiler will build is actually the asset manifest that can be used between the server and the browser to figure out shared dependencies. And through these build artifacts, Remix can do stuff like eliminate render plus fetch waterfalls that are so common nowadays in development. Besides this, with these build artifacts, once again, Remix can run pretty much anywhere, any hosting service, as long as it runs JavaScript. So that's pretty great. Besides this, Remix is a server-side HTTP handler. So what I mean by this is Remix is not a server. Remix is something that's given to a server that allows you to run it everywhere. So as long as you have a server, for instance, as an Express, you can have Remix running in it. Remix is also a server framework. So if you're familiar with server-side model view controller frameworks like either Rails or Laravel, Remix stands between the view and the controller and allows you to build the model for yourself. And that's pretty great. And finally, Remix is considered a browser framework. So once Remix has served the document to your browser, it will be pretty much handle the hydration of it, because everything in Remix is built on the server side. And while it also works on the client side, Remix handles this potential hydration that you deal with. So Remix has a main philosophy, which is stuff like embraces the server-side and client model. So what I mean by this is, while you cannot make your the user network fast, you can make your servers fast. You can optimize your servers. So Remix leverages this stuff and it tries to send as less data to the client, so that the client doesn't have to take care of all these type of things. Besides this, it works with the foundations of the web, browsers, HTTP, and HTML. So these are stuff that have been around for over 20 years. They are pretty stable, and they are great. So Remix picks up these kind of things, and, well, just leverages them. It also uses JavaScript to augment your user experience by emulating the browser behavior. So what I mean by this is also what's called progressive enhancement. So, sorry, water break. So, while most recent frameworks only use every APIs for the data, Remix gives you write and read through what's called and what's been around for a couple of years, which is the HTML forms. So by leveraging forms and JavaScript, Remix can do what is called to be progressive enhancement. And by doing this, it also gives you a better user experience in like different ways. For instance, you don't need to download and evaluate JavaScript and CSS assets when you're including JavaScript with Remix, and it will only fetch data for the parts of layout that change whenever you're changing places. Finally, it doesn't over-abstract the underlying technologies. What I mean by this is, the team that created Remix, Ryan Florence, Michael Jackson, they work for React training. And as they've been working throughout these years and teaching people, they found out that most of the stuff are overly abstracted. Remix abstracts some things, but the things that are abstracted, they give you to learn them the same way you use the browser. So you have an abstraction, but the abstraction is controlled so that you can learn stuff as previously. So, fundamentals of Remix. And now it's the part that we're going to get practical, and I'm trying to share some code. So Remix, for me, it's about three different things. The first one is the concept of nested routing. So nested routing is pretty much the general idea that you have coupling of segments of the URL that have a component hierarchy in the UI. So what do I mean by this? So let's look at both of these examples. We have user profile and we have user account. These are both routes. So considering the route user, it has either a profile and it has an account. One thing that we can see that it's common between these two routes, it's this top level part. So this represents one part of the hierarchy. When we speak about nested routes is, instead of when we want to go to user profile or user account, creating a main component to this, we can just leverage nested routing and render whatever we need inside of our parent. Don't worry, I'll show you a bit more when we get to the code about this. So, speaking about data loading or mutations. Before Remix and considering a React ecosystem, we were used to these kind of things, useEffect, React query, SWR. With Remix, we don't have to worry about this type of things. By including something that it's called a loader, this example is not very well seen here, but by having something that it's called a loader, this is a function that will run on the server, and Remix will use it to fetch your data, and then render your component so that when the client receives the component, it already has the data. So it here, once again, removes the need for doing client-side fetching. For the mutations, it's pretty much the same thing. So, like I said, mutations in Remix leverage forms. So how does it work? Pretty much we just describe our form as we have. You've been using before Remix and traditionally with a web. And then we do something that it's called an action. An action is something that runs on the server, and it will pick up when data is transmitted through it so that it can perform your mutations. So now considering this, I'm just going to share my screen and my code. OK, I need to change this to the light side. Let me see. OK, better? Cool. So let me just show you my example in here. If this wants to change, so. OK. OK. So here we're going to have a simple application. And the purpose of this application is to build something like the Tower of Babylon, which was something that happened in older comics of around 2000, where we had pretty much Batman build a list of the weaknesses of every member of the Justice League. So this is pretty much the purpose that I want this application to serve is we are going to be adding a way to check all the superheroes that we have in here, a way to add new superheroes, and a way to delete them. So this is pretty much the behavior that we're going to want to do in this application. So right now, what we have in here, the login is already pre-built, so we don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. But what we have in here is a nav bar where we want to list all our nav items. So this will be the first step that we want to do in our application. So here we have our heroes route. How do we know that this is a route? Because it's inside the routes folder. Pretty much what happens here is that Remix will look into this folder and say anything from inside here is going to be rendered on this route. So as this is called heroes, this is going to be rendered at the heroes route. So what we want to do right now is to find a way to get our data. So how do we do this? By using a loader. So loaders, we just declare them by importing a loader. We are using TypeScript, so I'm just going to type stuff so it doesn't yell at me. Okay, so we declare our loader function. Then we're going to have an asynchronous function because it's going to do some data fetching. And now we're going to use our models. So I have pretty much a bunch of models built here. This is using Prisma to connect with a SQLite database. But pretty much we have a bunch of functions in here responsible for getting our hero by your ID, for creating our hero, and to get our heroes and delete. So one thing that it's important to know is since we have an authentication built in this, every authenticated user is going to have their own built heroes. So this means that, like, for instance, like Batman is paranoid and he doesn't want anyone else to access the stuff that it has. If other hero uses this application or whatever, they're going to have their own data. So putting this in consideration, now we're going to get our heroes. And we're going to await and I'll call my function called getHeroes. So as you can see right now, this function needs a user ID. So the user ID is something that it's pre-built into the application. And the way to get our user ID, it's just called a function called require user ID, and we need to pass it our request because the way that the system is built that whenever you authenticate, it creates a session storage for your user, and that is passed throughout all of your application. So for you to have access to that, the loader function gives you access to a bunch of stuff. It gives you access to your current request. It gives you access to parameters that your request might have. So here we just have a logic request and pass it this user ID function. And this, right now, we're going to have access to our user ID, so we can just pass it to our function. And now we have our hero list. Now the question is how we are going to pass this hero list fetched on a server to our client. Well, by using something called JSON. I imported it from the wrong side. So what is JSON? You might ask. So Remix leverages the web, and here it leverages request and response handlers. So JSON is a function that pretty much wraps your data with this response header. Response actually sends the 302 header, and it parses your data in JSON so that your client can have access to the data. So here we just send our JSON with our heroes. Oops, I mistyped this. Okay, so now that we are sending the data to our user, we need to somehow in our client consume it. So this is the scenario where we leverage something, a custom hook that Remix has built, which is called use loader data. This hook will be responsible for fetching the return of the loader and giving it to your client. So now we have a component here that's expecting our heroes list. We can just pass it. And if everything is well built, okay, this is, boom, it failed. Why? Oh, okay, because I'm sending the data and I need to send the heroes. And now if I refetch it, I should have my heroes here already listed. One thing that it's usually a common practice in Remix to make stuff with loaders easier is to type them out. So let's just create a type called loader data. And this will be used so that we can enforce that the data we are receiving actually matches the type that we want. So here we're going to be creating heroes, and we're going to say that this is awaited because it comes from our model, and this is a synchronous function. And the type is going to be the return type of our get heroes. And this will pretty much tell TypeScript that all the data that needs to be returned through here and through here it's going to be this one. And this will be able to enforce it and make sure that we have autocomplete and other kind of stuff that is cool from TypeScript. So yeah, now we have our heroes, so we should be able to click them and show them. No, not really, because there's no way for us to show our heroes right now. This is giving us a 404 because it doesn't exist. So we need to figure out a way to display our heroes on the page. And right now, this is where we want to average nested routes. We have our main route in here, which is our heroes page, and we want to use all this empty white space in here to show our data. So let's create a nested route. First things first, before selecting our users, I would like just to have a default behavior. So whenever I pick up this page, I say, okay, no data is selected, please click add hero or whatever. So how does this work with Remix? Pretty much, okay, I already have built it here, but we create a page, a folder, with the name of the route that we are matching. So in this scenario, if the route we are matching is heroes, we want to create a folder with heroes, and inside of it, we're going to create an index. And this index is going to be just a default component, so default function, hero index, whatever. And what this is going to return pretty much is just a paragraph saying no heroes are listed, please click on the left to add them. So yeah, now that I have this default component, what we would expect for us to do it, okay, this is just breaking, was for it to show in here. But right now, we are not telling Remix that, hey, look, we have this, and we want you to pick up the children, the nested routes, and render them inside of your main component in here. So how do we do this? Considering that these heroes is actually the main component, we have to let Remix know that we need to render nested routes. And how we do it? By adding an outlet. Okay, so if I go back here, you can see that automatically it added whatever we wanted. So pretty much an outlet will let Remix know that, hey, if you see something that matches this route, in this scenario, it's going to match our index. It's going to let them know, okay, this is a nested route, so I want to render it inside of this component. Okay, so just one thing. Oh, I don't have a default configurer. Okay, let's just change this really quick. So, okay, now we are listing our stuff, but we still have this issue that whenever we select a hero, we want to display it. Now, we want to use pretty much the same things as we did previous. We want to, whenever I select a hero, instead of having no heroes listed, I show the hero in here. So how do I do this? Once again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to, considering that this route is an ID, I'm not going to be building a route for each one of these IDs. I have to Remix know somehow that, hey, we are going to have this route is going to change, so we need to figure out a way to display it. And this is where slugs come into play. So how do we represent a slug? We just do something like this. So yeah, I don't know if you can see pretty well, but pretty much this symbol will let Remix know that, okay, here, this is a slug, and this should match any pattern of text that is after my heroes route. So what this will tell Remix is everything that's in front of heroes should be matching with this slug. So now this is the part that we want to render our data. So let's just do this really quick. Okay, so in here, we want to display our hero data. Right now, I have a pre-built component in here that's pretty much just receives a hero, and it's going to return all the data that it has styled with Tailwind as well. So we're going to leverage this component just to render whatever we want. So we just here, we just send our div, then we put our hero creator, no hero component actually. Right now it's failing to import. Why? Quick question. Hero component. Okay, we can just manually import it later. So right now Um, right now, since this hero component is going to be needing the data, we need to figure out some way to fetch our data through Remix. So once again, we're going to be leveraging our loaders. So we create a loader. Once again, typed with the loader function. I'm just going to fix this because this automatically picks up a server and we want node from here. And in here, once again, this is going to be an asynchronous function. And we want to pretty much follow the same approach as we did previously. So we want to get into our models and say to the database, yeah, can you give me any hero that matches the ID in my route? So first things first that we need to do is pretty much the same steps as before. We need to get our user ID. Oops. So here, this is an asynchronous function. Require user ID. And now that we have our user ID, we need to pass it the request. So once again, we leverage our loader function and destructure the patterns that we want from here. Okay. So we get our request and we pass it our request. Okay, so the next step would be to try to fetch our user. So here, or user or hero, sorry. So here we just call the function that comes from our models called getUser by ID. No, user hero, sorry. Hero by ID. So this is a function that's supposed to receive a user ID and the ID of my route. So the ID that we see here, in here, it's supposed to be passed to our component. So how do we do this? Like I said previously, our loader function, besides giving you the request, it also gives you the parameters. So you can just leverage this and use these parameters so that we can have our hero ID. So here we just pass our user, and we want to pass the ID. We just say parameters hero ID. So how does it know that it's hero ID? Because this is the name we gave after the slug. So it's going to be using it so that we can pick up the data that we want. Now, you might be seeing that TypeScript is yelling at me. It's letting me know that this parameter is invalid. So we need to quiet TypeScript and letting them know, no, I'm pretty sure that whenever the data reaches there, it's going to be valid. So what we're going to be doing here is leveraging this function called invariant, which will pretty much assert that the data is not undefined. So this is going to receive our hero ID and the message, hero ID not found. So this is pretty much on the scenarios that for some reason the data is not valid and we need to list it. So this is just pretty much to assert it, and as you can see, TypeScript stayed quiet now because it knows that if it passes through this function, it's going to be able to display our data. So this is pretty great. Okay, so now that we have our hero, we should be able to return it. So once again, JSON. Let me just import it. And we're going to pass it our hero. One thing that we did previously that I forgot to do here is create our type for loader data. So here we're just going to create our loader data and with the hero and the type hero. Now, one thing that you might see that's different from the previous one is the way we handle our heroes. Because on this scenario, I want it definitely to return our hero and not return a promise or some type of data that's undefined or whatever. So I want to make sure that my hero exists. So this is me actually enforcing that I want to use the hero type. Okay, so receives, oh, okay. It's referring to a type. I need to import this type from my hero. Okay, let me just fix this part from my hero server part. So wherever is it, it's hero server. That server. And right now, okay, first, oh, I need to put the models in here. Oh, wait, it's actually in here already. So I just need to get it from here. So here I have my type, and the type is going to be used here. Oh, I know why it's yelling at me. Because I had the same name as the component, show hero. So right now, I'm just going to enforce that I receive a hero, and I'm going to return it. So now that I typed, this TypeScript is started to yell at me again because, okay, the return of your query can be null. It cannot find a hero. So once again, we need to make TypeScript not yell at us. So how do we do this? Once again, we just do some assertions. So we want to make sure that if there's no hero, we're gonna let the user know that something went wrong. So let's just throw a new response where the body is hero not found and the status code is going to be 404. So that we know that, okay, if something went wrong, it's definitely going to let the user know. Okay, so now that we have our loader data and the data is being returned, we just have to figure out a way to display it. So once again, we average our data, use loader function, because it's the way that we can get the return of the data from the loader, and we type it as loader data. Okay, now I just need to redeclare my hero component. Hero creator, no, it's not the hero creator that I want the hero component from hero component. Okay, so this hero component is actually going to be receiving a hero, and we pass it through the data.hero. So now, if everything is wrong, if everything is okay, and we go back to this, and we refresh, now nested routes come into play once again. So pretty much picks up the ID, and it then, just recap, it goes into here, fetches our data, returns the data, and it shows us in here. If for some reason we pass it not a valid ID, it's going to throw that 404 response that we set up previously. So as you can see, nested routes are super powerful, because if I wanted just to set up another nested route, I could create the folder, or use slugs, or use other name, whatever. So right now, we are displaying our heroes. So we already taken care of data fetching. So how do we do mutations in the Remix ecosystem? Okay, this is the part that we're going to be taking care of. So let's create a new file called new. So the objective of this file is going to be a route that we want to redirect the user. So where it's going to have a form, because that's how we do mutations in Remix, and this form is going to be used to do a post. So how do we do this once again? Export, and we create our component, hero, create, add hero. I forgot the function. So in here, we're just going to be pretty much do what I said previously. We're going to create a form, and this is pretty much a standard web form, but Remix only added some extra functionalities in case we have JavaScript. For instance, as that examples that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the talk, where it just fetches the data. It only fetches the data that it's going to be necessary in case of a re-render. So this is just for progressive enhancement stuff. On the other side, on the other aspect, it's going to run pretty much like a standard form. So we have the form, we specify the method that we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing a post. And inside of here, we're going to leverage this component that it's pre-built already, which is called hero creator. Now you might be wondering, what does this component have? So first things first, is it exports a type called action data with the things that this component is supposed to support. If it has a form error, if it has any type of errors, or if it receives some fields. Then it's going to be doing a couple of things. This is just progressive enhancement stuff with React, so it's pretty much just attaching refs to our inputs, and in case there's an error, it will focus them automatically. And then we have our labels, where the name. So each hero should have 3 attributes: name, weakness, and secret identity. And here we have our name, we have our input, we attach the ref that we created previously, we give it a name so that whenever we do a post, this is the attribute that goes into our form data. We give it a default value in case there's an error and we want to trigger a re-render. And we just use ARIA attributes in case there are errors and we want to let the browser take care of it. And we do pretty much the same thing for secret identity and weakness. And then we have a submit button. So this is pretty much the stuff that it's baked inside this component that it's going to be given to this form. So let me just give some new stuff in here, just so it looks prettier. Style, okay. And let's just add display flex in here. Flex, gap 8. This is just some standard stuff, so it looks pretty in here. Don't worry about this part. So in here, We have our flex direction, and we want a column. Oops. Okay, let me just format because on this laptop I don't have everything set up. So now we have the form created. We just have to somehow link this to there. So let's just add this part. So in our heroes component, we have to let the user know that whenever he clicks in here, we should be triggering this to the new route. So we do this by converting this div to a link, because link it's a component that React Router and Remixed use, so that you can trigger a route change pretty much to the new one. So by using this component, we just have to let the Remix know where it's going to be the new route. So here we just say to, and the route is going to be new. Okay. Let's just format this once again. So now if I click in here, it's going to be sending me to the new component. In here, we have the form we created. This form has pretty much these attributes that we would like to create. Now, if we save, we still don't have a way to handle this post. So this is the part that we are going to be building now. Inside of our new component, we are going to be created an action, because loaders are for data fetching, actions are for mutations. So here, we create an action with the type action data, because that's what Remix gives you to. Oh, sorry, not action data, action function. Action data is going to be for later. So here we give this data node. And pretty much what this function does and the way it acts, it's the same way as the other one, as the loader. So it has access to the request, and it has access to the parameters if we need them. So in this scenario, okay, let me figure out what's missing here. Export const action, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Sorry? Did I understand again? No. Okay, so, oh, this is the stuff here. No, wait, no, this is the stuff. Okay, there's gonna be something. Sorry? Oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't see the brackets. This here is very small. Thank you. Well caught. So now that we have our stuff in here, now we have to make sure that we do pretty much the same stuff that we want. So we're going to be creating our hero. So here we leverage our create hero function. So this is, once again, is the function that comes from our models. And this function is supposed to receive a bunch of things. So it's waiting, as you can see, to receive a name, a secret identity, a user ID, and a weakness. So here, once again, just to get the user ID, let's leverage pretty much the same thing we had in all our other stuff. Require user ID. We pass it our request. And now we're going to get the user ID, so we can just pass it here. So now we need to have access to the other type of stuff. So how do we do this? Remix is going to be, whenever we do a post, this is going to be sent through the form data. So now we need to have access to the form data. So how do we get the form data? This form data comes in our request. So pretty much by accessing our request, we can ask it, okay, request, give me the form data that was sent through you to post. So now that you have this data, we can just say, okay, form data, I want to get the name attribute. So now we're going to be doing this to secret identity and for weaknesses. So weakness, the same thing in here, and secret identity. And the same thing in here. So pretty much what this is going to be doing is when in our identity, in our inputs, whenever we fill the name, the secret identity, then weakness, and do a post, we send this data through here and we leverage it. Okay, so now we have this data. We can create our hero, right? We just send our name, we just send our weakness, we send our secret identity, and TypeScript is yelling at me again because, well, the return of a form data can either be an entry value or it can be null. So for some reason, the data cannot be sent through the form. So now we have to handle this scenario so that TypeScript stops yelling at us once again. So we just do an assertion where if type of name, oh sorry, type of name is different from string, and we do the same thing for all the other attributes. So we just need to make sure that if for some reason the type of these attributes is not a string, we're going to be handling it. So if it's not a string and it's not a weakness, it's not a string, you're going to be letting the user know that something went wrong. So to make it easier, I like to create a function called bad request, which is a function that it's going to be receiving my data. So the data that comes from our action, and the data that's supposed to return from our action is our action data. So using this bad request, what I'm going to be doing pretty much is just leveraging the JSON again. Okay, I need to import it. And letting the user know that, okay, this data went wrong, and just get a 400, because there was a bad request when trying to create our form. Something did not work properly. So in this type of function, in this if here, whenever we're going to have an error, we just let the user know that there was a bad request, and we send it with a form error that your data is not valid, because for some reason we receive data that it's not a string. Okay, so right now, as you can see, TypeScript stayed quiet because now it knows that the data that it's going to be here is supposed to be valid. So once we create our hero, we're just going to want to be doing something. Okay, I'm going to create the hero, but I'm not going to want to stay on my form. I want to, okay, now, for instance, see my hero data that I just created. So here, instead of returning the data, we're going to let Remix know that, okay, we're going to have to redirect you to the route that it's going to have this user so that you can see its data. So here, we leverage the redirect function that it's going to be imported from upstairs, from here. And pretty much what this redirect does, it's setting a response with the location header and with the status 302, so that it knows that it's going to be redirected, and this is the new point that it wants to go to. So in here, we're just going to let the user know that, okay, we want to go to the routes heroes, and we're going to go to the place where the hero ID is, because after we create a hero, this is going to return the new data of my hero. So if everything is working properly, which I hope it is, we just refetch this. If I go here and just say, okay, Green Lantern, the secret identity, Al Jordan, and the weakness, fear, if I save this, it should do the post, because, okay, now the mutation happened successfully, and it triggered the redirect. So everything is working properly, right? There's just one thing that we forgot, because there's nothing stopping me from doing this. So right now, when I do a post, we are not validating if we have invalid data, if we are sending empty data. So let's just take care of this really quick. For this, I like to create a simple function called validateEmpty. And this is a function that it's going to be receiving a value, which is supposed to be a string. And if our value dot length is 0, we're going to just return this field is required. Or if it's not, right now, let's just send undefined so it's easier. Now let's use this function inside of here. So now we already know that it's not a string, that whenever it passes this if, it's going to be a string, so we just need to assert that the string is not empty, it's valid. So the way I do it here is creating an errors page. And here for each attribute, I just call validate if empty, and I pass it the name. And then I do the same thing for weakness, and the same thing for secret identity. So this errors object is going to pretty much checking everything if it's empty. So now we just have the user know, okay, the data that you added, it's not valid. So once again, how do we do this? We create an if condition where we're going to be doing object.values, because this is pretty much going to be returning all the values of my errors object. And if some of them happens to be a Boolean, so if some of them happens to have a string, it's going to be valid. Then I just want to return a bad request. Where here we're going to be sending our errors. And inside of our fields, we're going to be sending the current data because we want to make sure that whenever the page reloads after a post, and if there's an error, we still continue displaying the data on the form. So here we pass it the name, the weakness, and the secret identity. Okay, so this should work, but there's just one thing that we are forgetting. We are not passing our action data to our component. So here, action data. Like the user loader data, there's a function, a hook. Here we have a use action data, where we're pretty much going to average our action data. And in here, now as action data, so it's TypeScript knows that it's supposed to be this, and inside of our hero component creator, we pass it this action data. Okay, so now if you go back to our hero and we try to save, it's going to let us know, okay, everything here is required because, well, our data is required. So let's just add new data. Jason. Okay, Todd, weakness, Joker, something like that. So once again, as you can see, everything is working properly. We created fetching data, we did some mutations. Now I just don't like having this data here, so let's create one more action just to handle a deletion in this scenario. So inside of our hero ID, let's create a form where the method is going to be a post once again. And in this form, we're going to have a button that's going to be responsible for doing whatever we want. Let me just copy something in here so it's easier and it's going to save time. So this is going to be a button with a type submit. It has this class name, and in here we're going to want to be delete hero. Okay, so this button is created, form is created, this is inside of a div. I just need to import my form component. Okay, form component here. So if I save, I need to format this because this is super ugly. Okay, why is it not formatting? There's an error here somehow. Oh, okay, oh, this is not supposed to be here. Yes, it is, sorry. Okay, so now it should format properly. So now if we go in here, we have a delete button. But if we click it, there's no method allowed because once again, we didn't create our action. So just to set up our action, we're going to create a simple function once again, export const action function, just to type it once again so TypeScript knows it. And this is once again going to be an asynchronous function, and I'm just going to copy this part for the sake of time because it's going to be pretty much the same thing, because we're going to be needing to validate, and we are going to be using the param ID so that we can trigger a delete for that specific ID. So now what we're going to be doing, now that we have a hero ID and the user ID, is called a function called delete hero. So this function receives an ID, which is going to be our parameters hero ID, hero ID, and it takes a user ID. So after delete, we don't want to continue on the same page, so we're just going to trigger a redirect to our old page, to our heroes page. So here, I'm just going to trigger a redirect to heroes. Okay, I just need to import redirect and action function. Okay, so now that this is done, if we go back into here and I delete it, oops, it didn't work. So what did we fail in here? So there's a wait. Oops. Okay, this is awaitable. I need to wait for this. We pass it the hero parameter. Let's check this again. Okay, now it's deleted. We needed to wait for the request to be triggered. So yeah, this pretty much wraps up the coding part of the presentation. Just a small part that I would like to show to you before it ends. Okay, I need to go back to my slides because for some reason I closed them. And this doesn't have, so let me just once again go back in here, if the internet allows me. But pretty much what we saw in here was the simple things that we might need to do Remix in use Remix nowadays: loaders, actions, and okay, this is showing the notes, and I don't want to show the speaker notes, not have speaker notes as well. I just broke this. technical problem. So what we were seeing in that slide, and I'm just going to show here real quick if I want to go back into it. Okay, cool. What we were seeing in that slide, and it was pretty much the last thing here, is that Remix gives you a bunch of stacks to use for stuff that we need. The stack that I used here for this demo was the Indie stack, which pretty much comes pre-built with Prisma, SQLite, FlyIO, so you can deploy to there, Cypress, and pretty much a bunch of things. All these stacks depend on the stuff that you're going to be needing to use your application. Now, a point that is often asked is, okay, but I'm using Next. Should I stop using Next and use Remix? The answer is no, for most cases, because if you're already using it right now, it doesn't kind of make sense to stop everything that you're doing and migrate to Remix. While Next handles stuff on a server-side generation way, Remix handles it on an SSR way. There are stuff here that Remix is faster than Node, for instance, serving dynamic content, because while Remix just fetches the data and populates everything that it's pre-built with it, with this data, with Next, we are going to either have to fetch the data in the client side, or we're going to have to trigger another build with the new data. A couple of stuff that it makes it faster with Remix. It enables faster user experience, even on slow networks. Another thing, it handles automatic errors, interruptions and race conditions, and build times are nearly instant decoupled from data. And one final thing, just to wrap up, because I actually forgot to show you this. I'm just going to go in here and in my notes, and I'm going to disable JavaScript. So, as you can see, Remix can work without JavaScript. And this is something super powerful. Like I said in the beginning, JavaScript is what in Remix can be added as progressive enhancement. And this is what makes Remix super fast and super powerful. So, yeah, with that said, and just to wrap up, thank you for watching this talk. Like I said, I'm a developer advocate at the OX group. We have a booth in the sponsors booth, so please make sure to check and speak with the amazing people that are there. And thank you all. This is my Twitter QR code if you want to scan it.